3, 2. And we should be live on Facebook. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another digital workshop. Today, we are partnering with Pot TV Digital to bring you Jake Savage, who has the coolest last name ever, by the way, and is a new dad. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. Without further ado, feel free to take it away.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. Grateful to be here. And yes, brand new dad. My wife and I had our baby this past Wednesday morning, which is wild. Definitely a crazy experience, but enjoying every minute of it so far. And good just to be able to connect with everybody here today and run through some really fun material on sales and building rapport. So we can go ahead and jump right into it. I wanted to start with, let me share my screen here and I'll share a little bit of background on myself. Okay. So today, as you probably saw in a couple of the posts, the main topic is going to be creating stronger connections with potential customers, investors, and donors. And I think primarily for this group, connected with Streetpreneur. I know a lot of you are entrepreneurs and you're just getting started. And I think that this is one of the most crucial points for you in your journey is when you're interacting with these very first potential customers, because it's going to make all the difference in the long run. You can fight this uphill battle to try to work on your conversion rates for your website and making your brand more attractive and driving marketing and advertising to help bring more people to you. But if you can be more persuasive and more impactful in those first interactions with people, you're going to have far more success right from the get-go instead of having to rely on all these different tools to drive more traffic to you. I think you're going to be able to generate more word of mouth, more referrals, and build stronger connections with those individuals. And plus, if you're even earlier than all that and you don't have the marketing dollars or advertising dollars, every meeting that you have counts. Every interaction that you have with a potential customer needs to matter, right? You need to start generating revenue and getting the ball rolling. So I'm going to share some tips today based off of my personal experience in 13 years of selling, and also some data and some science and some tips from FBI hostage negotiators, all designed to help you be more impactful in those first few minutes of interacting with potential customers. So a little bit about me. Today, I am the president and co-owner of a sales organization called Basemakers, and we're an outsourced sales team for emerging food and beverage brands. So we work with a lot of up-and-coming brands, but some of the ones that you may have heard of would be RX Bar or Health Aid Kombucha, two bigger brands that we work with. And when these brands are starting, they can hire sales team members in each market around the nation, or they can hire our company for a fraction of the cost. So we employ around 50 people nationwide that operate in the sales capacity for these brands. And we go around into grocery stores nationwide, helping to sell brands in and helping to expand the presence of each brand within the store. So we have to use these rapport building techniques when we go into these stores, because grocery store managers interact with tons of vendors and reps every single day. And it's all about making ourselves stand out and getting them to listen to us in the middle of their busy day. So that's what I do primarily right now. I also spend time doing sales trainings and working with nonprofits to help nonprofits be more persuasive and win larger donations. I got my start in all this when I landed this job kind of randomly as a door-to-door salesman back when I was 15 and 16 years old. Somebody came and approached me and thought that I'd be decent at it, and I kind of went for it and ended up sticking with it for 7 years and knocking on just about 100,000 doors. That's what I tallied up at one point. So had plenty of opportunities to try to build rapport in 5 seconds with 100,000 different people across the nation. I knocked doors in DC, Tampa, Florida, Denver, Chicago. So everything that I'm going to share with you all today are things that I've tried, things that I've tested, and things that are proven to work. So even if some of them sound a little out there, would just love for you to trust me and commit to trying a couple of these things, at least one of the things that I share with everyone today. So that's a little bit about me, and you can also follow along my journey on Instagram. I'm pretty active on there, sharing tips on persuasive communication primarily, and through my podcast, Persuasion School. So those are just a few more resources if you're looking on becoming a more persuasive version of yourself to also continue maximizing those opportunities with investors and potential customers. So what I wanted to run through with everybody today, we're going to talk a little bit about first impressions. And there's probably some information on this that you've seen before or read before in different articles. And I hope to bring some new information to it that you've never heard of before. So we're going to talk about first impressions or thin slicing. Then I'm going to share some tips from the FBI hostage negotiators. And that's exciting stuff that I'm sure a lot of you have not heard of before. Then we're going to go into the science behind making individuals laugh, how this is going to help you make more money in the long run. And then hopefully, if we get to it, depending on the time, we'll go into understanding our audience through a psychological perspective and how that can help us to make a larger impact as well. So I've got a couple questions here, and I know this is a live webinar, so this will be rhetorical. I'll ask the question, and I just want you to be thinking about this as we progress through the slides here. The first one is, what's the one thing that you hope to take away from today's session? And I've done this same training over Zoom before, so that's why I have entered in the chat. Obviously, being live over Facebook, we don't have that. So just think about this to yourself, maybe write it down. What's the one thing you hope to take away from today's session? And in tandem with that, maybe this will help to accompany that question. What's one or more of the biggest challenges that you have when it comes to connecting with others? One of the more common ones that I've heard from individuals while doing these trainings is trying to connect with somebody who just doesn't seem interested or doesn't seem engaged. So that's also what we're going to focus on. I know that's a big one when you're reaching out, especially if you're doing cold outreach via LinkedIn or email. How do you connect with someone who seems uninterested or disengaged? Okay, so while you're thinking about what your biggest challenge is, we can go ahead and jump into the very beginning piece here, which is breaking preoccupation. So this is where those first impressions come into play. So first off, I'll ask another question here. Be thinking about this. How long do you think it takes for others to make a first impression of us? I'll give you a couple seconds to think. So a lot of people have guessed anywhere from 1 to 2 minutes, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, maybe 10 seconds. But a recent Harvard study shows that people are making a first impression of us in the first 4 seconds of meeting us. Just the first 4 seconds. So you could have a 30-minute meeting planned with a potential customer or potential investor, but the outcome of that meeting is largely determined by the first 4 seconds of the interaction. So there are a couple of things that we need to take into account when it comes to these first impressions. Then there are some basics that a lot of us are familiar with, right? Like eye contact, from handshake, all that is great. But there are a few other things that we can take into consideration when meeting these people for the first time. So it takes 4 seconds to get a first impression for people to judge us and make a first impression. Now I want to ask you, how long do you think it takes for others to judge whether or not we're trustworthy? So this is separate from the first impression. This is just trustworthiness. And this is extra important because if they're going to buy from you or if they're going to invest into you, trust is probably the largest determining factor. So think about it right now. How long do you think it takes for others to judge whether or not you are trustworthy? For most people, I hear the response is starting to increase after the first question. So some people will guess for first impressions, maybe 5 seconds, 4 seconds, they're getting pretty close. But when I ask about trustworthiness, most people think that that takes a bit longer. You know, it takes several minutes, maybe even 30 minutes to an hour for them to get to know us on a personal level and decide whether or not they can trust us. But recent studies on this have actually shown that people will judge our trustworthiness in the first tenth of a second of meeting us. So before they've even made a first full impression, they've already judged whether or not we're a trustworthy individual. And that all happened in the first tenth of a second. So these are all things that we need to be taken into consideration when we have these first meetings. And a lot of them are happening over Zoom, since we're not in person quite yet. So take this into consideration when you do meet in person, but everything that we're going to share is applicable over Zoom. And it's very important to consider. All right, so first impression is 4 seconds. Trustworthiness is a tenth of a second. So what can we do to help boost our trustworthiness in the eyes of our audience? One of the things that we need to take into consideration is the next piece on the slide here, which is our clothing. So studies show that 95% of a first impression, including trustworthiness, are based off of clothing. And there's not some groundbreaking science behind this. It's simply because typically 90% of our bodies are covered by clothes. So the clothes that we wear really, really matter. And one of the more recent studies that was done on this, it was actually just done in the UK within the past couple of years. And they had a sample group of people testing out their trustworthiness, whether they determined somebody else is trustworthy just based off of a handful of different photos. So when they were asked to look at different photos of individuals, they were wearing different things, the sizes were different, the clothes, whether they were tight or loose, and the style of the clothing was different. And so individuals that wore tailored clothes, fitted clothes, they didn't even necessarily have to be nicer clothes or a suit or a fancy dress. It was just something that was form-fitting. So form-fitting clothes, individuals that were wearing this were rated as more confident, more successful, more flexible, and a higher income earner on top of being trustworthy. So if you're wearing fitted clothing, again, this was something that caught me off guard when I first heard it, but it's just something to consider. Make sure what you're wearing is not only appropriate, but that it is more fitted, because you will be viewed as more confident, a higher income earner, and more trustworthy. So the last piece there is body language and posture. So we need to be thinking about our body language and posture. Already seeing people straighten up when it comes to these first impressions. So a question for you, rhetorical. If you have seen, or have you seen the TED Talk Presence by Amy Cuddy? If you haven't, I highly recommend. This is a fantastic TED Talk. It's about 15 minutes, I believe, by a Harvard professor named Amy Cuddy. So Amy has dedicated her life to studying the science behind our posture and our presence and how it affects the chemicals in our body that help us to feel more confident. And I'll give you an example of one of the studies that came out was, this is all within the past 5 to 10 years. So in the past, we had an idea that our body posture maybe had an effect on our confidence level, but recent studies actually prove it. So what they did was they had a sample group of subjects lie down on the ground in the fetal position for 5 minutes and then draw their blood to test their testosterone levels. So how much testosterone was surging through their system. And then they had another group of the same size stand for 5 minutes in a power pose. So standing up with arms and legs spread. And they drew their blood. And the levels of testosterone were far higher in every single test subject, in those that were in a power pose and those that were in the fetal position on the ground. So what's this say? Our posture has a direct effect on the chemicals in our body that are helping us to feel more confident. That's that testosterone, giving us that command presence, that we deserve to be there, that we should be there, and commanding respect. So immediately, a lot of us can start thinking, okay, well, I need to get into a power pose. And this isn't going to fly in every single meeting that we have, especially over Zoom, just looking like this. But there are smaller steps that we could take that will help. First is carrying yourself in a way that shows that you're powerful and proud. And there are a couple different things that we can do here. The first is to slow down your breathing. I just tried to do that as I was saying that. I mean, this is one of the toughest things for me. I just always naturally talk fast. I get really excited when I speak, but that can actually damage the credibility and the rapport building techniques that I'm trying to put into place. So I'm still working on this one myself, but it's very important to slow down your breathing. And when you do breathe using your stomach muscles. So there are 3 different ways typically that we breathe. and most of the time we're not even conscious of these ways. One is with the shoulders, the other is with the chest, and the last one is with your stomach. So you want to start breathing with your stomach if you're meeting with someone in person or over Zoom. Because if your shoulders are moving, you can easily start to tense your shoulders and lean forward. And this is going to do the opposite of carrying ourselves in a manner that's proud and powerful. So what we need to do is keep our shoulders down and back, and we can keep them there by continuing to breathe using our stomach. And this is just also going to help us to stay calm and stay fluid during these conversations, and also keep your shoulders down and back. So this one is a tough one. Also a tough one for me. Anytime I sit down next to my wife, I'm almost always lower than she is, and I'm probably 6 inches taller than she is when we're sitting next to each other. So I'm working on my posture too. But it's very important to keep the shoulders down and back and breathing slowly through your stomach. Now, if you're meeting in person, you want to plant your feet firmly on the ground, and you're just sending this message: I'm safe, I'm okay, I deserve to be here. These all may sound obvious now that I'm saying it, but a lot of building rapport in these initial interactions and creating trustworthiness, these are primal instincts that are happening. Your neocortex is not sizing you up and making judgments of you and your character in a tenth of a second. They're not, our brains aren't capable of doing that. It's not a neocortex action that's happening. It's purely an amygdala action. So that's your croc brain, our primitive brain. That's the brain that's taking over and judging whether or not you're trustworthy. So the words that you say, or how powerful your presentation is, or your information, that's not going to come into play here, at least not yet. And there are other trainings that I lead where we can talk about the importance of what's in the material and storytelling. But right now, we're just talking about creating rapport and trustworthiness. And this is all instinctual. It's all primal. So that's why we need to be extra conscious of the way that we're carrying ourselves, because their neocortex is not making the decision. Their croc brains are. So the next thing that we want to do is focus on our hands. It's very important to help promote our trustworthiness that we speak using our hands. And this is extra difficult over Zoom. I'm even finding myself trying to raise my hands while I'm talking just so you can see them. But there are a couple reasons that we want to do this. Speaking with our hands is a visual cue to our audience of our sincerity, of our intentions, right? Because what we're saying with our body language needs to be in line with what's coming out of our mouth. And if it's not, something is going to feel off. Even if what's coming out of your mouth is true and accurate information, if it feels off, or if your audience gets the sense that something isn't flowing right, that's when your trustworthiness level starts to decrease, almost as though this is a video game. And trustworthiness is a bar on the left side of the screen, right? It's going to go up or down depending on how this interaction is going. And the higher it is, the better chance you have of closing the deal, whether it's with an investor or potential customer. So we need to use our hands when we're speaking, because this is a visual cue of our sincerity and of our intentions. It would look weird to you if I was getting all excited right now during this even live webinar, and my hands are down my sides the entire time, and I never used my hands to speak. And I got excited and I smiled, but my hands stayed down on my sides. It's not going to look right. And even if you have something in your hands, like a notepad or iPad, set them down, especially during the first couple minutes of interacting with somebody. Your hands should be free so they can see your interactions. And you also want them to see your hand movements. And you also want them to be authentic. I don't know if anybody here watches Shark Tank, but I always see inauthentic body language on Shark Tank, probably because they read one or more of these articles talking about how your body language needs to send this command presence and demand respect. And a lot of them are attempting this, but they're doing it improperly, and it comes across as inauthentic. And that's when they're holding their hands up high like this, where it's above their sternum. Like, sharks, I've got a great deal for you today. You won't believe. Like, immediately, you start to sense that something just isn't quite right. That's not normal. That doesn't look normal at all. And most people aren't fooled by that. So you want to keep your hands below your sternum, above your navel. And that's kind of the sweet spot to use your hands when you talk. Again, if you think this is obvious, that's totally fine. But we're talking about the primitive brain here, not the neocortex. These are just subtle cues, subtle things that we need to be considering during the first couple minutes. Lastly, on first impressions, for anybody that thinks that maybe this isn't as important, I want you to think about Steph Curry. Most of us are familiar with Steph Curry, and who he has an endorsement deal in terms of sporting or athletic apparel. Some of you will know that he has a contract with Under Armour, and some of you may or may not know that he almost had a contract with Nike. But at the last second, it fell through, and he went with Under Armour. And a lot of people were shocked, and when they asked why, he said there was one reason. When he went to the Nike headquarters in Oregon, he said he felt a bad impression within the first few minutes of being in the HQ. So Steph Curry made this endorsement deal with Under Armour purely based on nothing else other than a first impression, because everything else was relatively apples to apples in terms of the amount of money he was going to make and all the different responsibilities that he was going to have. Just first impressions. So the same goes for us as entrepreneurs. If you have a potential customer that's going to buy, they have the option to buy from you or to buy from one of your competitors. And if the pricing is relatively the same or the product is relatively the same, even though you may think your product is great, nobody compares to it, nothing is like it, to them, it may still be similar. And one of the key differentiators should be you in order for you to build that trustworthiness and them to feel confident with you moving forward with you. Same thing for investors. The first impression makes all the difference. Okay, so the next thing that I want to go into are 4 different tips that come from FBI hostage negotiators for building rapport. And this is an incredible finding, really, that came out a few years ago through Time magazine. So different FBI negotiators were being interviewed after hostage situations, and they were all being asked the same question. These are conversations that are happening independently of each other. And interviewers are asking hostage negotiators, so what's the most important thing when it comes to a successful hostage negotiation situation? What's like the number one most important key needed for success? And all these hostage negotiators started saying the same thing. It all comes down to building rapport with the hostage taker, which is kind of odd. But the number one key to lives being saved in a hostage negotiation is building rapport with the hostage taker. So after enough FBI negotiators all said the same thing, Time magazine did an article on it. And they came out with 10 tips that were provided from the FBI. So there are 4 that I really love and that I've adopted and that I use in my world of selling today that I think are extremely helpful. And those are the 4 that I wanted to share with you as they pertain to building rapport. The first one is to create something called an artificial time constraint. An artificial time constraint. So, and I'll explain what this is. Studies on conversations show that awkwardness or tension in a conversation doesn't come from what's being discussed. So if there's tension, right, that's going to damage the rapport. If there's awkwardness, that's going to damage the rapport. And any tension or awkwardness in a conversation doesn't come from what's being discussed, which is contrary to what we might think, right? And the awkwardness and tension doesn't come from the individuals. It comes when we don't know where the conversation is headed. That's where the tension starts to arise. And if you're not sure what I mean, picture yourself like on a plane. This is probably one of the best places. You sit down on a plane, you pop your headphones in, and you're sitting there and you're just waiting. You're still on the tarmac and you're just kind of sitting there. And then all of a sudden you see somebody come, walk down the aisle, get closer and closer and closer to you. And then they plop down in the seat right next to you. And they just look at you right in the eyes and say, hey, and nothing else. Right? Like we're going to start to feel a little anxiety well up. And it's not because it has anything to do with them. It's because we don't know where this is going. And maybe you're tired and you're not in the mood to talk. And immediately we're just thinking, I don't know where this is going. Like, what's going on here? And so an artificial time constraint is basically placing like a time frame on the conversation, beginning and an end. And this will set your audience at ease and reduce any tension that could possibly well up. I personally always love to think of this, this entire thing when it comes to building rapport, but especially these tips. Thinking about it like, one of those Ocean's 11 movies or something where somebody has to make their way across the museum floor and all the different lasers are going across the floor. And if you touch one of the lasers, the alarm goes off, right? And that's how I view these interactions with potential customers or investors. Like it's almost this dance, this art form. And if you do the wrong thing, tension starts to well up, anxiety starts to well up a little bit. The rapport goes down. You set the alarm off, and that's going to deter them from paying attention for the rest of the conversation. All of your content, your information could be incredibly important. It could be compelling, but if they're not tuned in for it, it won't matter, right? All right, so let's come back to that artificial time constraint. What that looks like is when you first meet, whether this is over Zoom or in person or a phone call, it's important that you let them know when the conversation is ending. For example, at Basemakers, the company that I work for, and I'll provide you with this example, but I want you to be thinking about how it pertains to you specifically and how you can use this. So we have salespeople all around the nation that show up unannounced to a grocery store in an attempt to have a conversation with the store manager about putting the product into a better place in the store, like right at eye level or something like that. And what we train our team to do is to say, when they approach that manager, say, hey, I know you're busy, but so am I. I actually have to leave here in about 5 minutes. So I just wanted to see if you had about 60 seconds to chat. I had a quick question for you. So before you ask how you're doing, how's the day been, how's quarantine been treating you, any of that stuff, set the artificial time constraint. Put it in place, let them know when it's going to end. And if you have a predetermined time meeting, like you said, a 30-minute call, you said a 30-minute Zoom meeting or an hour-long Zoom meeting, even though that time frame is listed on the invite, still clarify it when you first get together to help alleviate any of that tension. Hey, I know that we're scheduled from 4 to 5 p.m. today, but I want to let you know I do have a hard stop at 5, so it might be better if we wrap up 5 minutes earlier. But again, if you're calling out of the blue, or if you're speaking with a potential customer, because maybe they've called you and you don't have a predetermined time slot, we want to let them know that the end of the conversation is in sight. We're reducing any tension. Okay. The second piece here is using reciprocity. So reciprocity is, again, this is tapping into our instincts as humans. This is an innate action that we feel inclined to take when people give us something. When people give us a gift, whether it could be a tangible gift or intangible, like a compliment, we feel inclined to reciprocate. So we want them to reciprocate as well. And so in some instances, maybe if you're meeting with an investor, you can think ahead and get to know who they are and do some research and find a potential gift that they might be interested in. But if you don't know who the person is or who your audience that you're going to be speaking with, because it's a potential customer and the conversation just organically happened out of the blue, think about what intangible gifts you can provide to them. Or maybe it's some free aspect of your product, that you can provide like a small dose of it for free or some sort of value for free so that they feel inclined to reciprocate. This is wired into our human nature. Again, so using reciprocity. A lot of people will use gifts or some type of bait, for example, or carrot as leverage. If you do this, then we will provide you with this additional value, whatever it is. And this makes sense, especially if you're trying to save on costs. You might not be able to afford providing people with some type of value up front each time. But we need to be considering like the human nature piece, this part that's wired into our primitive brains to reciprocate and give that value up front, whatever it is. It will come back. Your customers will be inclined to reciprocate. So we've got artificial time constraints. We're using reciprocity. The third one here is something that this is probably been the most impactful tip out of everything that I've learned from this list here for me personally, and it's asking for help or asking for a favor. So if you want to build rapport, a lot of us would think that if we conduct or perform a favor for our audience, that's going to get them to like us more if we do something for them. But actually, the opposite is true. And this is because people love helping other people. When we help others, we feel good about ourselves, right? Because the endorphins start to flow. It's more of like an emotional thing. So the endorphins are flowing, we're feeling good about ourselves. But here's the thing about endorphins that we need to remember. When there is a surplus of endorphins flowing through our brains understand that there's an excess, but our brains don't know where the excess came from, which is interesting. So your brain will go, oh, there's an excess, there's a surplus of endorphins flowing through my brain right now, this mind, but I don't know where it came from. So subconsciously, what our brains do is they associate that surplus of endorphins with those closest to us in proximity. So if you can get somebody to feel good about themselves and get the endorphins flowing while you're with them or communicating with them, they'll start to associate those good feelings with you. I know people that have gone so far as to even take potential investors out for a run or exercise prior to asking them to invest, just to get the endorphins running, because they know that investor is going to associate those good feelings with them. That's how powerful this is. So what I like to do is ask for help or ask for some type of favor. And here, 2 quick examples for you. One from current job and one from previous job. And while I'm saying these, I want you to think about how you can ask for help in what way, shape, or form as it pertains to you and what you're doing. So bringing it to Basemakers again with these salespeople in the grocery stores, a lot of sales reps around the nation are familiar with the idea of trying to offer help, like maybe throwing some of the grocery back stock onto the shelf to help out the manager to win them over and get them to like them enough to say yes to putting their product in a special place in the store. But we do the exact opposite at our company. When we go in, we train our team members to ask the manager. So we're asking the person we're trying to sell to, we're asking them to do us a favor. Again, contrary to popular belief. But what we do is when we go and we ask them to go on their computer, stop what they're doing, go on their computer, scan our product, check the sales data, and give us the sales data. This is like 5 minutes out of their super busy day. And oftentimes they'll even say, I'm too busy, I don't have time for that. And we train our team to kind of navigate through that and still push even harder and ask them to get that information for us. And although sometimes they do it reluctantly and say, oh, okay, all right, I'll get you that information. 5 minutes later, after they've gone through the process of stopping what they're doing, going to their computer, getting the information, we're now bonded. They did it reluctantly or begrudgingly at first, but now we're cracking jokes and the rapport is starting to strengthen. And we can also take those extra endorphins that they're going to associate with me and use that throughout the remainder of the conversation. Another way that I did this, so that's with intangible information, right? Asking for information for them to provide it to you. What I did in my time as a door-to-door salesperson for 7 years is I was trained to ask for a glass of water, especially if the sale wasn't going as I planned. I was supposed to ask for a glass of water. So I would show up, kind of give my pitch on the front doorstep, and if I felt like as long as they hadn't slammed the door in my face, if they weren't immediately biting to what I was saying, and they kind of seemed a little bit on the fence, I would just pause. I would say, hey, while you're thinking about it, it's really hot out here. Would you mind if I troubled you for a glass of water? Would that be okay? And then sure enough, they would go get me that glass of water, come back, and I'm going to drink it very slowly to buy myself some more time. But I'm having this glass of water that they got for me, and they start to feel good about themselves for helping me. The endorphins start to flow. And sure enough, we'd end up inside the house closing the deal an hour later. And I eventually got more and more bold after doing this for years, where I would, and this is going to sound crazy, I would start asking if they had any food in the house, and sometimes if I'd be able to join them for dinner. I remember the first time I asked to join somebody for dinner, and that felt like the craziest thing I had ever done. But it blew my mind when the person at the door said, absolutely, come on in and sit with us. And then I would get to sit down with their family and have dinner. and then eventually sell them this home automation system, is what I was telling door to door. So the ability to control everything in your home from your phone. So ask for help. It's going to feel weird. It's going to feel a little bit awkward, but you will benefit because you're going to get those endorphins flowing. All right, the fourth one here for the FBI tips is making sure your body language is in sync. Now, before I share what this is actually about, some of you might be thinking right now, okay, I've heard this. You want to mirror the body language of the person that you're selling to try to get on the same level. That's a common misunderstanding. And that's what a lot of probably newer or inexperienced salespeople will do, is mimic the body language of the individual that they're selling to. Right? If they're crossing their arms, you're going to cross your arms, or if they're leaning against something, you start leaning against something to try to get into this, connection. But we want to do the opposite. So I've got another question for you here. Think about this. Have you ever caught yourself unconsciously mimicking somebody else's facial expression? Maybe watching a movie, watching a show. This Is Us, right? You start feeling the same way. You start smiling or frowning when the characters on the screen are doing the same thing. I bring up the movie and the TV show example because there have been studies done in movie theaters where they place cameras facing the audiences during the movie, and they can see that the audience members are all mimicking the facial expressions of the actors on screen. Okay, so where I'm going with this is we want to do the opposite of mimicking our audience's body language. We want to get them to mimic us. So we want to think about this almost as like a game. That's our mission, is getting them to mimic us. When your audience is mimicking your body language, you know you're in sync and the rapport is strong. And the reason that we do this is again a primal instinctual function in our body, is when we mimic somebody else's facial expressions, it's a mechanism for us to help empathize with another person. So if we see somebody smiling on screen, subconsciously, that function is going to kick in, that mechanism for us to smile on screen while they are, because it's going to help us feel what they're feeling. It's going to help us feel what they're feeling. And this is important because sales, or your first interactions with whomever it is, this is about a transference of emotion. Right? We want to transfer confidence. We want to transfer trust. We want to transfer excitement and happiness and positivity. And in order for us to transfer this emotion, we need them to feel the way that we feel. And so we can talk about it all we want, but maybe whatever it is that we're saying isn't enough to quite capture their attention. Right? So the other things that we need to consider are these primal instinctual mechanisms. Let's take advantage of those to get them to feel the way that we feel. So we want to start by testing this out along the way. So what you can do to test it is get them to be in sync with you. Start just by nodding your head. Start by smiling. These are the two easiest ones. Start smiling and start nodding your head during the conversation with the potential buyer or investor, and get them to do the same. And you want to just look at this like a crescendo. Start small and work your way up. And when you see them mimicking all of your body language, you're in a great spot. So you start by smiling, start by nodding, and then eventually you can start by leaning back in your chair, maybe scooting back and crossing your legs. And then as you see them follow in that body language, within 30 seconds or so, you know the rapport is strong and you've got a good connection built between the two of you. All right, so to recap those four: artificial time constraints. Hey, I know you're busy, so am I. I actually have to run in about 10 minutes. So if that's okay with you, I think we're just probably going to take about 7 or 8 minutes here today. And then we can catch up again later on, or whatever the case may be. Hey, I know we had this slaughter for 4 to 5 p.m. I do have a hard stop at 4:55. Just laying that groundwork. Next is using reciprocity. We feel inclined. It's wired into our nature to give when somebody has given us something. And so if we don't have anything tangible, it can just be a compliment. Asking for help, asking for a favor. We have to get creative with this one, especially if you just have one interaction with another individual. How can you ask them for help? And fourth, body language, making sure that it's in sync. Not us mimicking them, getting them to mimic us. Another little tip on the body language thing while we're here before we move on. People used to think that when arms were crossed, it meant that they were mentally closed off to what they're saying. There have been plenty of studies done on this, and they eventually found that there's no way to prove whether or not this is actually the case. If the arms are crossed, whether or not they're engaged or disengaged. So I can't make any claims as to whether or not that's factual or based off of science. But I can tell you that I have personally felt this way in 13 years of selling. That if somebody did have their arms crossed, it almost played a larger role in their overall just ability to like soak in what I'm saying. Like they feel a little bit closed off. And so if you do see somebody that just has their arms crossed and they're watching you, they're not really mimicking your body language, and you're trying all these tips, one of the best things that you can do is to hand them something, especially if you're in person. If you're in Zoom, it's going to be extra hard. But if you're in person, hand them something to look at. Hey, take a look at this real quick. And if you don't have anything, pull up something on your phone and have them take a look at their phone. Just hand them whatever it is and get them to uncross their arms, and then try to restart that loop of getting them to mimic your body language. So food for thought there. Moving along would be the science behind using laughter. So I always had a hunch about this throughout years of door-to-door sales and car sales too, before I got into Basemakers. I always felt like, it wasn't based off of data. I had no way of proving whether or not this was true. But I felt as though the more I could make my audience or potential customer laugh, the better chance I had of selling to them. And I remember telling this to people, some of my other coworkers, and they're like, I don't really know. I don't want them to laugh. I want them to take me seriously. Like, this is a big deal. I need to come across as confident and trustworthy. And especially the higher the price tag of whatever it is that they're buying, the more serious it should be. It's a serious decision. But I always disagreed. I felt like if I could get them laughing, no matter the size of the price tag, that it would still create a stronger bond and put them at ease. And I continued that into Basemakers. And I started off selling $5,000 security systems door to door. And now at Basemakers, we sell a service that our customers are paying upwards of $40,000 per month. And I'm using the exact same tactics here, selling a $40,000 a month service as I did for a one-time $5,000 security system. So I can tell you it works, but now I have science to prove it. So when we laugh, we are decreasing the stress hormones in our body. And there are three of them: epinephrine, cortisol, and dopamine. And epinephrine specifically is tension. It's tension related. So again, looking at this like crossing that floor with all the different lasers on it in the museum, the one wrong move starts to set it up. This is where we can get really in tune with that, is making sure that we're alleviating any cortisol, dopamine, or epinephrine, and any tension that could be welling up by making sure that they're laughing or smiling. And you don't have to be a hilarious individual. I'm not a comedian, but just anything to kind of get them to chuckle a little bit. It's going to decrease the stress hormone. The second piece here is we are incapable of experiencing two emotions at once. Humans are. Can't experience two emotions at once. So if we can get them to genuinely laugh, not fake laugh or pity laugh because our joke sucks, really actually laugh and laugh with us, that genuine laughter is going to take over any other potential emotion that they could be experiencing, like stress, anxiety, or tension, right? So if we can only feel one emotion, we want them to be laughing and feeling a positive emotion. It's all about transferring the emotions. And the last one is, as you can see, oxygen enhances our intake of oxygen-rich air. And the main thing that's happening when we get more oxygen-rich air is we are creating more endorphins. We're allowing the endorphins to flow. And I've already explained the importance of having the endorphins flow when you're having these initial interactions. Again, the surplus of endorphins surges through our brains, and our brains don't know where it comes from. So it chooses to associate that surplus with the person that we're speaking with. So getting them to laugh will get this oxygen-rich intake going on and get those endorphins up for them to start associating that with us and for them to feel better. Also, creativity and engagement is increased. And we want creativity to be increased in our potential audience because we want them to get creative on ways that we can work together and for them to start thinking actively brainstorming, how is this going to work? I really like this interaction that I'm having with this individual. What ways can we make this work down the road? How can we partner together? And we want to get all of those things flowing. And it's just very simple. We can do it just from making them laugh. So we're coming up on the 45-minute mark here, and I want to make sure that we have some time for questions. So I'm going to just briefly touch on this last piece, and just for all of us to be considering a few other things when it comes to interacting with individuals. Some of us learned about this pyramid in psychology classes in high school or college, but it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So there was a psychologist named Abraham Maslow who did studies on us as humans to identify what are the most important of all of our needs in life. And he created this pyramid starting with physiological at the bottom, just basic things like security and health, homeostasis, going all the way up to self-actualization. Right? It is a need that we have, self-fulfillment, morality, creativity, and problem solving. And in between, you've got safety, belonging, and esteem. So we want to look at this as like a gas tank, right? Or a pool even. And we want to, in these first few minutes with an individual of building rapport, I want to be filling that tank or filling that pool with water all the way up to the top. And so when you think about, well, how can I consider my potential customer or investors' health needs, or homeostasis or security? Well, this is where we can start to tap into storytelling, which is a whole different training session, but storytelling to start asking the right questions and getting them to think about how working with you or buying from you is actually going to help contribute towards their job security or towards their overall health. Same thing with their confidence. Buying from you, right in the middle, the psychological needs, confidence, respect, friendship, family. We want them to feel as though buying from you or investing into you is going to help them feel more confident. How can their status increase by partnering with you? How can they get more respect in their community from partnering with you? These are all things that we can be considering. And lastly, at the very top, part of self-actualization, morality, creativity, and problem solving. Man, this is where it gets really fun because we can start inviting our audience into the overall process. So we're not just pitching at them the entire time. We can ask them questions to say, how do you see us working together? How do you see this service or product benefiting some of those or solving some of those problems that you mentioned earlier? So instead of you being the one to say, hey, you mentioned problem A, B, and C. Well, if you buy from us, we'll be able to give you the solutions of X, Y, and Z. We want to leave that up to them, for them to be the creative problem solvers in this interaction between the two of us. So again, these things can all be taken into account in the first few minutes of meeting an individual, but we can also be considering them throughout the duration of the meeting. So if it's an hour-long meeting, we need to be thinking about our trustworthiness in those first few seconds, right? That's where the posture and the dress comes into play. But some of these FBI tips in the laughter and considering our hierarchy of needs from a psychological standpoint will all help you to create a stronger interaction and ultimately lead to a successful outcome. A lot of information, I know, but I am available for questions after this as well. So I wanted to turn it over to Juliana and Ritza if there are any questions.
Awesome. So I got a very interesting question on our Facebook Messenger. And if you're watching live, you can send your questions to Street Entrepreneurs Facebook Messenger, and I'll read them out loud anonymously. So the question is, body language does not come naturally to me. Do you have any advice for individuals on the autism spectrum?
Very interesting. I think I would recommend practicing. This is tough, but I think there are all things that we struggle with and that we can learn, and body language is just another one of those things that we can learn. Persuasive communication is the same. Any activity that we're going to conduct requires practice, and body language does too. If you feel like it's difficult for you to maintain a confident posture when you are not aside of interacting with your potential customer or investor, just practice on your own time, sitting back with your shoulders down and back and breathing through your stomach. because we want to commit this to muscle memory. So, over time, you can become good enough at it to where it is muscle memory to breathe through your stomach, keep your shoulders back and down, and just practice. Just keep practicing.
Awesome. Here's another question for you. What is the best pitch you've ever heard?
What's the best pitch I've ever heard? That's interesting. Best pitch I've ever heard, without a doubt, was from a shoe salesman in a small town in Colorado. And this was 7 or 8 years ago. And I've never forgotten this. And it's a long story, so I'll keep it short for time's sake here. But basically, I walked into a shoe store to buy a pair of walking shoes because I was doing door-to-door sales and walking all over the place. And I had a budget of $100. And the shoe salesman took me to the wall with all the shoes and grabbed off a $200 pair and said, I think this is exactly what you need. And I said, no thanks, no way. $100 is the max I can spend today. I'm not going to do it. And a mediocre salesperson probably would have just said, okay, no problem. Let's find something in your price range and see what we can do, and moved on to a cheaper pair of shoes. Instead, this person said, okay, no problem. Before I show you any shoes that are in the $100 price range, I've just got a couple questions for you, and then we can go back to the shoes. He asked me all types of questions about pain that I'm feeling in my joints, ankles, knees, hips, back. Do I have sleeping problems? What are my activities, my hobbies? I mean, this guy, everything. So to just gain a full picture and understanding of who I am as an individual and all the different pain points in my life. And at the very end of all that, he said, okay, you know what? I think I've got it. I know the right pair of shoes for you. And we walk back over to the wall, and he pulls off the same freaking pair of $200 shoes. And I was like, no, man, I already told you I'm not paying $200 for these shoes. And he said, 1 second. You explained to me that you have problems sleeping at night, which makes it tough for you to work and perform at your best. And you also said that one of the main problems sleeping comes from your back. Well, the reason your back is hurting is because your hips aren't aligned, which I saw when we were standing on the pressure pad. And your hips aren't aligned because your knees are off. And your knees are off because your ankles are off. And at the base of all these joints are your feet. And your feet aren't even aligned. And one of them doesn't even have an arch anymore. And I'm assuming that's the foot you use to push when you skateboard. And I was skateboarding a lot at the time. This was a
Oh my God.
And I said, yeah, that is the foot that I use to push when I skateboard. And he's like, all right, well, if you wear these shoes, and he explained to me how it would be a chain reaction all the way up. The shoes, the base of your feet will help the ankles, will help the knees, will help the hips, will help the back, will help you sleep better. And you bet that day I walked out buying a $200 pair of shoes with a $50 pair of insoles. So way more than double I was planning on spending.
Were the shoes worth it? Were the shoes as good as the salesman said?
Without a doubt, because I wasn't buying some rubber and some cloth for my feet. I was buying better rest. It had nothing to do with the material of the shoes. I was buying better rest. And still to this day, 8 years later, I buy that same pair of insoles every time they wear out. Same brand. So absolutely.
Interesting. Now tell us about a rejection. A sales rejection. When do you take no, or when do you pivot?
Man, that's a great question. All depends on the circumstances. First, you need to clarify, you need to do something called prospecting, right? Prospecting is just identifying somebody that is capable of buying, somebody that's a good fit for your product or service. Now, if you're having a conversation with somebody who you think is a potential buyer, but they were never a good fit truly for your service to begin with, you have no business moving forward after they told you no. Like if they say no, let it be. But if we've done our homework and our research, and this person is a perfect fit for our product or our service, it's our responsibility to keep going after we've been told no. It's our responsibility. So when I'm hit with a rejection, but I know truly that what I'm offering is going to make this person's life better or impact their life or solve the problem that they have, definitely not. I'm not getting out of there, right, without buying what it is that I'm offering. And so there are a couple things that we can look at. But when I get rejected, for me, I don't take it as the final, that's not it's not the end of the road. I just know I have more work to do. And there's an old saying that I love, and this isn't based off of facts or stats. I'm going to say that right now, but it's just an old sales saying. which is when somebody says no, it's because they don't know enough yet to say yes. Right? So when someone tells me no, I just think, all right, they don't have enough information quite yet. And so it's my job to start asking a few more questions. So I think if you get rejected, but you're certain that your product is going to benefit the lives of your potential customer, you've got to keep going. Like the shoe salesman. This is such a small example. We're talking about shoes, not some massive service or contract worth millions of dollars. But the shoes made all the difference, and it's still the same exact principle. And I've used the same principles today with larger contracts that are worth over $1 million in a year. Is being rejected, but me knowing full-heartedly that I can solve their problems. It's my responsibility to keep going. And if I give up, I'm doing them a disservice.
Jacob, I'd love to see you live. Can you sell me
On what?
on anything? Make up a product, or it could be a product you currently sell, and use the tactics you spoke about. Obviously, you can't take me on a walk, and I can't get you water, but I'm curious as to, like, when you're selling someone, are you thinking through? Wait, am I mirroring? Am I making them laugh? Are they walking, or is it so like these are things you're aware of, but it's so down that you just set go, that you wouldn't notice unless you're looking for it. Do you
Yeah,
practice? Is it natural or organic? Like how do you start?
yeah, 100%. Okay, so I mean, a couple things going on there, but I think in terms of am I thinking about that throughout the duration?
Yeah.
Yes and no. I was thinking about it far more when I first got started, and truly, I was lucky enough to get a job in door-to-door sales because that provided me with the opportunity to make small iterations, every 30 feet to what it is that I was thinking. If somebody slammed the door in my face, okay, what can I change at the next door? And sometimes it was my volume level. If the person came to the door and started talking softly, I would drop my volume to match theirs. And if I felt like it was too low, okay, I'm going to raise it the next time. You just make micro adjustments. So it is very important that you practice. I think there is no better practice than cold calling. Just get it out of your system. Just go through it, try a whole bunch of different things, see what works for you and see what doesn't work for you. So for one, practice makes perfect. Number two, if you're not able to cold call or you can't do, door to door, just pick up the phone and call anybody, I highly recommend that you record yourself. Would you buy from you is the question, right? And you'll know because you're going to get that feeling. So set up a camera, sit down in front of it, and give your pitch like you're pitching an investor. I promise you, if you do this, you will find things to improve on. I had been selling for years and thought I was, top of the world, best salesman ever. And then I remember recording myself and trying it and be like, oh my God, I look ridiculous. The things that I'm saying, the way I'm formulating my words with my mouth, my breathing, I've had to work on everything. And it's a constant process. But recording yourself, there's no better way to practice. So coming back to your question, practice with as many people as possible, and don't sweat the small things. If you're going through lots of potential customers right from the get-go and you feel like you're losing each one, it's all coming back to you because each one is just another at-bat. You're getting another at-bat. You're getting another practice. But commit to making yourself better each time. After each interaction, write down what went wrong and what you could do to improve. And then focus on doing that on the next one. Next is film yourself or record yourself. Just pull out the app on your phone and record yourself talking. Usually it's ums, ahs, likes, those types of things that you're going to start catching. And that's very important that we remove from the language, especially swear words. Nothing more unattractive than meeting with a new salesperson or someone that you're going to invest in and they start dropping swear words. Even if your potential customer is swearing, do not swear, right? We need to set a certain standard, and that's going to be associated with you and your character. This is a whole other training, but the 3 pillars of persuasion are logos, pathos, and ethos. This comes from Aristotle. And the most important piece of that is the ethos, which is your character. So the number one most important thing when it comes to influencing somebody else is your character. So side note, food for thought, don't swear. And then, so yeah, definitely practice, go through the motions, record yourself. And then you also asked, am I consciously thinking about this today? Now, most of it is committed to muscle memory and I'm just used to it, but I will be conscious if something is off and I'll fix it. I will be conscious if something is off, and I'll fix it. And that's when I make a micro adjustment along the way. See, okay,
Awesome.
so we're not in tandem right now. What can I do to fix it?
We got an interesting question. Can you sell me a pen?
Yeah, people love asking the "Can you sell me a pen" thing. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to what types of needs or problems that you have, or even internal goals. And if having a new pen is not necessarily going to meet any of those goals or needs, then I can't do a proper portrayal of selling you a pen if it's not actually going to help. One thing that I'm happy to do when you said, "Can I see you live on selling something?" I also offer sales training separately. And I absolutely love sales training. And there are plenty of people out there who feel as though they don't need this to train. Right? They think that they're just a people person. They've got it. It comes naturally to them, but it doesn't.
Here, let me
And
let me give it a try, and you can give me some feedback. You can be savage. Go. No, no,
I love
I
it.
can
sorry,
be
no, no,
savage.
Yeah,
no pun
hashtag grow
intended. It's
savagely.
just like seriously the coolest last name. Anyways, um, I'm gonna sell you something I know, which is street entrepreneurs. So
Okay.
I started Street Entrepreneurs 5 years ago
Mm-hmm.
because I really care about people that have three things. So I care about people that are solving problems that matter that they know firsthand, that are crazy enough to see a world that doesn't exist, and that are gritty enough to bring it to life. And I care about connecting them with the know how, the networks, and the capital to do that. Will you teach a workshop? Well, obviously you did, but that's thanks to Ritza. Um, what feedback? Should I have started with questions? Should I have lowered my voice? Was I smiling too
Mm.
much? Sorry, I'll stop.
No, no, no. That's great.
This is
I love that
live.
you brought this up. I love that you brought this up.
You're so
Um,
funny.
Yeah, and Juliana, like these are things that I can go on and on and on about. I love
Yeah,
talking. There are so many things to consider, but and I know that this is a hypothetical setting just between the two of us right now.
of
But some
course.
some thoughts if you're just asking what you would do next time.
Yeah.
Again, this is hypothetical, but let's just say you're going to pitch street entrepreneurs to somebody else moving forward. Absolutely, positively, let your audience be the first person to speak. And this is very important when over the phone or Zoom. Because what's the first thing we do? We start off with those kind of shooting the breeze conversations. What's the weather like? Where are you based out of? How have things been? What have you done during a quarantine or whatever? Like just those. We're all asking the same thing. So, and then oftentimes our audience, whether it's a potential investor or donor, they'll say, "All right, Juliana, I'm very interested in learning a little bit more about your organization. What can you tell me?" And then most of us, that's our cue to start. Okay, they're asking me, here's my pitch. I'm going to tell the story. I'm going to drop those three things that I'm looking for and how it can connect to their life. But this is where we need to pump the brakes. When they say, "Hey, tell me about you and what you do." When somebody asks me that, and they say, "Hey, I'd love to hear a little bit more about Basemakers," or if it's about sales training, "I'd love to hear a little bit more about your sales training and how you can help me." I'll say, "Absolutely." And I couldn't be more excited to talk about it. I absolutely love it. But before I do, and I'll come back to that, I was curious about you. I saw on LinkedIn that, and then something. I want them to speak first because this will do a couple things. While they're speaking, they're going to tell me all about themselves. They're going to speak in their own volume, in their own tonality, in their own cadence, the body language. I'm going to learn all of this stuff about them. So if we have a 30-minute time slot, I want them to take the first 15 minutes, and I'm going to observe everything that they're doing. And if they come across and they're really quiet while they're telling me the story about the brand that they've built and they're very excited about it, well, then when it comes for my turn to speak, I'm not going to be like, "Let me tell you about Basemakers. It is amazing." And I'm going to say, "We actually started Basemakers 5 years ago, and it is an incredible story." And I'm going to match a lot of their volume levels and their cadence of speech too, a lot of times. So for one, letting your audience speak first is great. Then asking questions. A key thing that we do, a key mistake that we make as salespeople is we're familiar with this idea of storytelling and we have our own story down. I started because I saw this problem and I wanted to solve this problem, and now I'm providing this service to people. But that's not the story. That should not be the story. The real story, because what we're doing in that is we're painting ourselves to be the hero. I found this problem and now I solved it, and our company is the hero. What we need to do is ask our audience about their goals and their needs, and then paint the picture, the story for them to be the hero, and we're simply the guide in the story. So storytelling should have almost nothing to do with us and more about them. So if you were talking to somebody about your organization, letting them speak first, and then asking them, what are some of your biggest challenges with what you've been building as an entrepreneur? Some of the biggest roadblocks that you have, what are they? What do you experience? You got the challenges down and then goals. What do you hope to accomplish the next year, 5 years? So you've got all this in your back pocket now, and now it's time for you to build your story. And so that's the challenge that they're overcoming, right? A character wants something but is unable to get it. They meet the guide, and the guide helps them through and calls them to action. That's what we're trying to do here. So I'd ask those questions first, then tell your story, and then ask. 60% of salespeople don't even ever ask for the deal. It blows my mind, but it's just because it's uncomfortable, right? Like asking them, so would you like to move forward today? Are you willing to try us out? Are you willing to purchase our service? 60% of people don't ask. You gotta ask.
So I see this a lot with people that are raising money. They either they'll pitch it as a favor, right? Or they won't give a concrete number.
Yeah.
They won't come out and say, "Will you invest $6,000?" Right? They won't come out and say it. They'll just be like, "So, it seems like you like what I'm doing, and I was thinking that perhaps you'd be interested in possibly maybe getting involved."
The answer would be no at that point.
Right. Oh man, yeah.
Anyways, thank you so much for your presentation and for all the questions. And I want to pass it on to Ritza so she can talk to us a little bit more about Pod TV, who's partnering with us for this workshop. And we're so happy that they're doing this with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Juliana. Jake, that was awesome, amazing presentation. And it actually brought me back to, I forgot actually that I was in sales. And to the point of the person that asked about sell me a pen, I used to in college, actually was in college, but I worked for MBNA America, and whoever knows where that company is. But anyway, I remember during my interview, they were like, okay, well, sell me something, like Juliana said. And I was like, what am I, dating myself? But I was like, I used to love wearing Ked sneakers. So I either had them on or whatever it was, but I definitely remember having to come up with some little pitch to sell these sneakers, but it must have worked because I got the job. And then while there, as opposed to what you were mentioning, not to necessarily mimic the investor or the possible client, what I used to do, and I found that it worked for me and it got me to be a pretty good salesperson at MBNA America, I used to mimic the voices of the states that I would call. So in particular, like Boston, I figured out after like 3 or 4 calls, I was able to sound a little bit like them. So when I would call, because you would just call in that one territory. So they felt like they were talking to somebody that was from there instead of this New Yorker, you know what I'm saying, which would have probably not gotten me to sales. So I really appreciate that. And then when you brought up Maslow, I thought about college because I used that for my thesis. So this was it was great. Yeah, it was a lot. It was really good. So we're excited that we were able to have you here for the series. It's been great. It's been amazing to partner with street entrepreneurs. We're Pod TV Digital. We're content development. We help brands position themselves on social media and all other platforms. We're based here in DC. And I invite you to visit our website, podtvdigital.com. And also, one thing that I didn't mention previously, we also have a large variety of content in our distribution channel, which is Pod TV Network. And I invite you to go there, podtvnetwork.com, and check out some of the content that we have there. And you could probably find links to get on over to Jake's social media platforms as well. So definitely visit us, and we look forward to continuing this partnership and bringing some more awesome conversations and workshops to this platform. So thank you.
Awesome. And I love how both of you have taken so much out of what many people would disregard, like door to door sales and knocking and cold calling. And there's so many lessons in that. And so many people disregard the lessons jobs like those bring, you know? And it is awesome. It is awesome. Yeah, you've built so much and learned so much from that. So thank you for being here, and I hope you have a beautiful weekend. Congratulations once again on
Yeah, a
um
beautiful, busy weekend.
Yes,
yeah,
very busy with the baby. But thank you both so much. This was
Thank
great.
you.
It's a great experience.
awesome.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, see you soon.